Welcome back to Dark Road Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 deeply unsettling accounts from people who drove down the wrong stretch of forgotten asphalt, walked the wrong overgrown trail, or turned onto a road that had no business still existing. These are stories from people who found something waiting in the dark that had no right to be there. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. I'd been putting off this particular drive for about 3 years. The Haverson Logging Road, that's what the forestry map called it, though I never once heard an actual person use that name out loud, cuts northeast off Highway 2 somewhere around milepost 187, and it dead ends about 11 miles in at what used to be a staging area for a timber operation that shut down sometime in the late 80s. I know this because I'd researched it. I research everything. My girlfriend at the time used to say I couldn't go to a grocery store without reading the Wikipedia article on the parking lot first. She wasn't entirely wrong. I was 31, between jobs in a way that felt more permanent than temporary, and I'd gotten deep into amateur cartography, specifically the habit of driving or hiking old industrial access roads and comparing the terrain against USGS topographic maps from the 50s and 60s. Things change. Clear cuts grow back in ways that don't match the old contour lines. Creeks shift. Roads that look like roads on paper become deer paths or nothing at all. I found it satisfying in a way I couldn't fully explain, like fact-checking the landscape. I left my apartment in Everett around 5 in the morning on a Thursday. I think it was Thursday, could have been Wednesday. I get those weeks confused now. I had a thermos of coffee that had already gone lukewarm, a gas station energy drink I'd bought the night before and hadn't opened yet, and a podcast about Soviet cartography playing through my truck speakers. The pine-shaped air freshener on my rearview mirror had lost most of its scent months ago, but I kept it there anyway. My left boot had a crust of dried mud on the toe from stepping in a puddle outside the 7-Eleven the previous week that I'd never quite managed to scrape all the way off. My watch hadn't worked since February. I wore it anyway. I turned onto Haverson Road just before 7. From the highway, it was easy to miss. No signage, just a gap in the scrub alder where the gravel began, and even the gravel petered out after about a quarter mile, giving way to packed dirt with 2 shallow ruts worn into it. The tree canopy closed overhead almost immediately. Second-growth Douglas fir mostly, with some hemlock mixed in. Thick understory. The light went from gray morning to deep green tunnel within about 30 seconds of turning off the highway. I drove slow, window down, listening for the sound of my truck frame catching on anything, watching for washouts. The podcast kept playing. Some Russian cartographer in the 70s had deliberately introduced errors into classified maps to confuse foreign intelligence. I remember thinking that was funny maps that lied on purpose. Around mile 4, I stopped to check a drainage crossing, a narrow plank bridge over a seasonal creek that looked questionable on the old topo sheet. It held fine. The creek below was running clear and low. I stood there for a minute just listening. Wind in the fir tops. A varied thrush somewhere off to the left, nothing else. I wasn't nervous. I was just a guy on a dirt road with a cold thermos and a dead watch doing something I liked. Around mile 6, where the road curved sharply right around a rock outcrop, I stopped because the old map showed a secondary spur branching left just past that curve. I wanted to see if any trace remained. There was. You could just make out where the ground dipped and the trees were slightly younger, a ghost of a road that had been growing back for 40 years. I took some notes. Drank half the energy drink. It tasted like burnt fruit and quiet regret. That's when I noticed the first one. About 20 yards into the tree line on my left, a young fir tree, maybe 15 feet tall, had been bent almost horizontal and tied off to a neighboring trunk with something dark. I thought at first it was old utility wire. bent trees on unusual wind loading, snow damage, all kinds of things can bow a young tree. But the bend was too deliberate. Too low, too even, like someone had applied sustained pressure over time and guided it into that specific arc. The bark from about waist height down to the tie point had been stripped in a careful spiral pattern, not torn, stripped. The exposed wood underneath was pale and slightly wet-looking, weeping a little still fresh. I told myself it was probably a forestry experiment. Universities do that sort of thing. Dendrology studies, growth pattern research. There were probably survey stakes somewhere nearby I hadn't noticed. I drove on to the staging area, spent about 40 minutes there taking notes, compared the clearing to the topo sheet. Everything matched reasonably well. The tree line had crept in maybe 30 feet on the north side. I ate a granola bar from my glove compartment that was probably from the previous autumn. Normal morning. The staging area felt like exactly what it was, an old industrial site slowly being reclaimed. Nothing unusual. I started back down the road around 11. The second bent tree appeared about 2 miles from the staging area. Same, young fir bent horizontal, bark stripped in an identical spiral, tied off with strips of something organic, bark maybe or dried root fiber. I slowed almost to a stop. Same pattern. I took a photo, rationalized it as a second sample tree from the same study. The third one stopped me completely. It was maybe 50 yards further along, right at the edge of the ruts, close enough that I could have reached out the window and touched it. A sapling no thicker than my forearm, bent into a low arch with both ends driven into the ground, forming a perfect upside-down U-same spiral stripping. But hanging from the apex of the arch, 3 small bones, pale and clean, threaded on dark sinew, turning slowly in the still air beneath the canopy. Here is what made me sit there with my foot on the brake for a very long time. I had driven past this exact stretch of road 3 hours earlier. Slowly, window down, these trees had not been here. Not bent, not arched, not decorated. They had not existed. I reached for rational explanation. I told myself maybe I'd drifted onto a slightly different track on the way in. I told myself the morning light versus the midday light could make things look completely different. I told myself I hadn't been paying attention. I told myself all of that while I pressed the accelerator down harder than I'd pressed it on anything in recent memory. I didn't look into the trees. I made a deliberate decision not to look into the trees on either side. I watched the road and I drove and I didn't stop, not even when something scraped along the passenger side of the truck with a sound like a fingernail drawn slowly across glass. The engine cut out once around mile 3, dropped dead for about 4 seconds, everything going silent including the podcast, then turned back over on its own. Cut out again briefly near the highway turnoff. Then I was on asphalt. I didn't look at the topographic map until I got home that evening. I'd left it folded on the passenger seat the whole drive. When I unfolded it on my kitchen table, there was a mark on it I hadn't made, a rough circle about 2 inches across, burned into the paper rather than drawn, with short lines radiating outward from its edge, centered precisely over milepost 187. The paper wasn't charred at the edges. It wasn't damaged. It was just marked, cleanly, in a way that paper doesn't mark itself. I still have the map. I've looked at it maybe 100 times. I haven't driven back up Haverson Road, and I've gotten pretty comfortable with the idea that I probably never will. Story 2. I was moving from Dallas to Denver for a new job, and the move itself was fine, exciting, even. I'd packed my car in 2 hours, said goodbye to my roommates, and by 7 in the morning I was already past Fort Worth with a gas station sandwich on the passenger seat and a cozy mystery audiobook playing. The kind where a retired librarian solves murders in a small English village. I remember that specifically because of how absurd the contrast felt later. I'm an engineer. Structural. I like systems, I like things that make logical sense, and I genuinely do not have a lot of patience for the kind of people who assign meaning to shadows. I say this not to sound tough, but because it matters, because what I'm about to describe isn't the kind of thing I came to easily. The Oklahoma Panhandle is about as stripped down a landscape as you're going to find anywhere. Flat, brown in October, enormous sky. You pass through Boise City around 10 at night, and there's not much to Boise City, some grain elevators, a couple of gas stations, a few streets of houses going dark for the night. I stopped to fill my tank. The woman working the register had that particular expression of someone who's been asked to do a thing they'd rather not do, not unfriendly, exactly, just uneasy. When I mentioned I was driving straight through to Colorado, she asked what time I expected to arrive. I said I'd probably roll in around 2 in the morning. The roads were empty, easy driving. She said, "Yeah," and then didn't say anything else, handed me my receipt. I stood there for a second waiting for whatever the rest of that sentence was, but there wasn't one. I figured she was just tired. It was almost 11 at night. People get tired, back on the highway. The sky out there is enormous and starless when it clouds over, which it had. My headlights felt like 2 thin pencils of light in a lot of absolute dark. The audiobook narrator was describing a village fete. A bumper sticker on a truck ahead of me earlier in the day, something aggressively cheerful about fishing, had been stuck in my head all evening for no reason. The dashboard lights made everything a dull orange. My sister had called around 7, and I'd let it go to voicemail, planning to call her back at my next stop. I never did make that call. Not that night anyway. Around mile marker 38, I remember the number because I'd been watching them pass as a way of tracking progress. Something stood in the outer edge of my headlight range. I picked it up as a shape, upright, and my first thought was deer because that's always your first thought out there. My second thought was that it was too tall and too still. A deer in headlights moves, shifts its weight, its ears go up. This was just standing, facing me dead center in the lane. I moved to the center line. It didn't move. I passed it doing 60 and caught maybe 2 seconds of it in my peripheral. Upright, long-limbed head tilted to the right at an angle that didn't suggest looking. It suggested something structural, something that had settled or been set that way. I kept driving. Told myself the dark plays tricks at distance. Told myself it was probably a person out there, a rancher or a driver with car trouble, and I felt a little guilty for not stopping. I told myself that for about 20 miles. The audiobook's librarian had solved the murder by the time I realized I'd somehow passed mile marker 38 again, which wasn't possible. I'd been going straight north, but there was the sign, green and reflective in my headlights, unmistakable. I hadn't turned around. I would have felt myself turn around. I slowed down, which was probably stupid. Stopped the car on the shoulder. Sat there with the engine running, trying to work out if I'd missed a loop in the road somewhere, a curve that circled back. I couldn't make sense of it. That's when I saw the shoe, dead center of the yellow dividing line, a child's sneaker. One of those bright ones with the Velcro straps and a cartoon character on the side. I couldn't tell which character from where I sat. It was just sitting there on the line, not knocked sideways, not lying on its side, placed, like someone had set it down with care. I had driven through this stretch 20 minutes earlier. There had been nothing on that road. I know there hadn't been because I'd been watching the road because of the shape. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough that the car's interior went from warm to just slightly cool. I was staring at that shoe, and then something made me look up to the far edge of my high beams, and it was there again, standing in the road ahead, but closer this time. Close enough that I could see the head tilt wasn't to one side, it was backward, chin lifted, face angled up toward the sky. And the jaw was wrong. I don't have a better word for it. The jaw was open in a way that suggested it had come unmoored from its usual position, hanging too low, like the hinge had gone slack. I did not evaluate this further. I put my car in drive and I went, 90 miles an hour for a very long time. I didn't stop. not at the Colorado line, not until I hit a 24-hour truck stop outside Trinidad where there were lights and people and fuel and noise. And I sat in that parking lot until my hands stopped shaking enough to call my sister. The next morning, I found the handprint. I was at the motel by then, getting ready to finish the drive, and I happened to look back at my car in the daylight. On the driver's side window on the outside of the glass was a handprint, palm flat, fingers spread facing inward. Not smeared by driving, crisp. When I was driving fast enough that no human arm could have reached my window from outside the car, something had pressed its hand against the glass, facing in, like it wanted to see me clearly. I called the motel desk and asked if they had security cameras in the lot. They did. The footage showed my car sitting undisturbed all night. The handprint was already there when I parked. Story 3. Me and Ferris had maybe 15% of a plan when we left that morning, which was about standard for anything we'd ever done together. The plan was, drive out to the old Callaway homestead site, take some pictures, look for a metal box our grandmother swore Granddaddy had buried near the back fence that supposedly had the original timber deed in it, and be back in time for Ferris to watch the game. That was the plan. Gran had drawn us a map on the back of an envelope the week before she moved to the assisted living place in Hattiesburg. It was a real piece of work, landmarks like the Big Dead Sycamore, and turn where the road dips, and other directions that only mean anything if you grew up there in 1962. Ferris studied it for about 10 minutes in the car before rotating it 90 degrees and announcing confidently that he now had it figured out. I want to be clear, Ferris did not have it figured out. We took the main county road south out of Roxy until it turned to gravel, then followed what the envelope called the back road along the low ground for about 4 miles. That road is on GPS only as a faint gray line with no name. It runs through bottomland, low, flat ground between the main ridges, the kind of terrain where the water table sits about 6 inches under the surface most of the year. Everything down there is cypress and tupelo and standing water, and the particular smell of organic material in various stages of decomposition. It's beautiful in a way that feels like it's actively trying to kill you. We've been driving slow for maybe a mile down that unnamed road when Ferris said something about the map. Actually, first, the truck cab smelled like French fries because Ferris had gotten a bag from the McDonald's drive-thru before we left, and the smell had fully colonized every surface. I mention this because the next thing I smelled was the opposite of French fries. It was the bottomland coming in through the vents, rot and mud and something green and slow. The road was unpaved, dirt compacted by decades of use into something nearly as hard as pavement, or so I assumed. We hit the first hollow sound about half a mile in. Felt it first, honestly, a slight give in the road under the tires, and then a low resonant boom that I can only describe as exactly the sound you'd expect from a wooden bridge when a heavy truck goes over it, except there was no bridge, just road surface, packed dirt over whatever was underneath. Old culvert, Ferris said without looking up from Gran's envelope. That's what I'd been thinking too. Old drainage culvert beneath the road, probably rusted out and half collapsed, just enough air space left to resonate. Made sense. The bottoms are full of old drainage infrastructure. Some of it goes back 100 years. We kept going. The fence line appeared on our left maybe a quarter mile further on. Barbed wire strung between old wooden posts at irregular intervals. Exactly the kind of fence a working farm would have had in the 1950s. Exactly the kind that gets left to deteriorate after the farm goes under. Some posts tilted, some missing entirely, wire rusting out in long orange sections. Normal. What was not normal was what sat on top of every single post along the visible length of that fence line. Every post that was still standing, and there were maybe 20, 25 of them, had a dead bird on it, Not placed there recently, these were desiccated, dried down to feathers and light bones, some of them held together by nothing but the shape of themselves. A crow on one post, something smaller on the next, a woodpecker, a few I couldn't identify from the truck. Some of them had been there so long they'd fused slightly to the wood beneath them. Old enough that the sight of them should have felt natural, like something that happened once and had long since become part of the landscape. But the posts were new, or not new but freshly driven. The wood was still pale and unweathered at the ground level where they'd been pushed in, and the disturbed soil at their bases hadn't had time to settle. Someone had recently re-driven every post along this fence line, and then left the old dead birds exactly where they were, or replaced them. Or, I don't know. I stopped being able to reason about it pretty quickly. Ferris said, "Huh." I said, "Yeah." Neither of us said anything else for a minute. I tried the one about wildlife, about owls caching prey on fence posts. That's a real thing, shrikes do it. But shrikes don't do it to 20 posts in a row, and they don't do it to birds. I knew that, and I said it out loud, and Ferris nodded slowly, and I could see him running through the same mental inventory I was running through and coming up just as empty. We drove past the fence line. About 200 yards further, the road dipped noticeably. The turn where the road dips Gran had marked, and beyond it we could see where the old homestead clearing must have been, just a slightly more open quality to the light ahead. We never got there. The second hollow sound was louder than the first, much louder, and this time the road moved. Not much, maybe half an inch, but it moved upward, like something below it had pressed up, the whole roadbed bowing slightly upward under both rear tires for maybe 3 seconds and then releasing, and the road settled back. I had the truck in reverse before I made a conscious decision to do that. Ferris had his door open. We both understood without any discussion that the plan had changed completely and permanently. I want to tell you we drove out slowly and calmly. We did not. I want to tell you I didn't look at the fence line on the way out. I did just once, and the birds were still there, and one of them had fallen sideways on its post, and its dry, hollow weight had settled it into a shape that looked, from certain angles, like it was watching. When one rear tire sank, just partially, just briefly, about 100 yards from where the road hit the gravel, and then pulled free with a wet sucking sound like the road had briefly decided not to let go, Ferris let out a sound that I hadn't heard him make since we were kids. I drove the rest of the way out at a speed that wasn't smart for that road and didn't slow down until we hit the county pavement. We didn't say much on the drive back. We got home, watched the game, sort of, went to sleep. 3 nights later, I woke up from a dream about that road. I was walking it, and the surface was moving under my feet in long, slow waves like breathing. I didn't tell Ferris. I figured it was just my own brain processing things, and I didn't feel like talking about it. About a week after that, Ferris was eating breakfast, and he said, out of nowhere, staring at his eggs, "I keep dreaming about that road moving." I put my coffee cup down very carefully. We didn't find Granddaddy's deed. We never went back. Story 4. I've been doing remote photography work for 15 years. Wilderness, mostly, backcountry landscapes, wildlife, the kind of terrain where you're alone for days at a stretch and the nearest other person is a long walk away. I've gotten turned around in fog in the Cascades. I've had black bears investigate my camp at 2 in the morning. I once spent a full night in my truck during a November storm in the Idaho Panhandle with the temperature dropping 30 degrees in 6 hours. I tell you this not to brag, but because I want you to understand that I am not easily spooked by remoteness. It's sort of my whole thing. The Forest Service road off Route 93 northwest of Salmon doesn't have a name on most maps. It has a number, FR094, or something close to that, and it runs about 9 miles into a north-facing slope that gets spectacular larch color in early October. I'd been watching it on satellite imagery for 2 seasons before I finally drove up to scout it in person. The satellite showed exactly what I'd hoped. Dense larch stands on the mid-slope, good light angles from the east, an open meadow near the top that would give me a clear view for sunrise shots. I got there late morning on a Tuesday, second week of October. The aspens along the lower road had already dropped their leaves, but the larches above were at full gold, and driving up that 9 miles in my truck was just. It was exactly the kind of morning that makes me grateful for the work I do. Ridiculous blue sky, smell of cold air and pine sap, a red-tailed hawk sitting on a snag about 50 yards off the road watching me pass with that particular hawk expression of tolerant contempt. I want to be specific about the mundane things before I get to the rest. I'd left my water bottle at the trailhead and had to drive back for it, which annoyed me. My left knee had been aching since a stumble the week before. I was wearing a fleece that was 2 sizes too big because it had been my ex-husband's and I'd just never gotten rid of it. I had half a protein bar in my jacket pocket that I'd been meaning to finish since breakfast. The drive up took about 40 minutes, and I spent most of it listening to nothing, just the road noise and the heater fan, which had a slight rattle that I'd been meaning to get looked at. I shot for about 6 hours. I was methodical, that's my process. I work a location in sections, overlapping frames, bracketing exposures. I shot the meadow at the top, the mid-slope larch stands, a small creek crossing about a mile below the meadow, a series of road-parallel shots looking back down the drainage, good variety of angles. By the time I packed up and started back toward the truck, the light was going amber and I had several hundred frames on my cards. I don't usually review shots in the field. I'd rather wait for a proper monitor at home. But I had some time before I needed to start down the mountain and lose my light, so I sat in the truck and pulled the card up on my camera's rear screen just to check for obvious exposure problems or missed focus. I scrolled through the first dozen frames, the meadow shots. Fine, slightly overexposed in the sky on a few, nothing I couldn't recover in post. I got to frame 13 and stopped. In the upper right background of the frame, a shot I'd taken looking across the meadow toward the northwest, there was a figure standing at the tree line. I'd been looking at that tree line for the entire time I was shooting, watching the light change on it. There hadn't been anyone there. The Forest Service road is gated at the bottom and I hadn't passed another vehicle. I zoomed in. The figure was standing completely still, facing the camera. I couldn't make out features at that resolution and distance. It was maybe 100 yards away, just a vertical shape, proportioned like a person facing my lens. I went back to the beginning of the card and started from frame 1. Frame 1, the first meadow shot from the south edge. Lower right background near a cluster of larches, the shape, standing, facing the camera. Frame 2, slightly different angle, same figure, same posture. It had moved position, or it was a different distance, harder to judge, but it was still there, still facing the lens. I went through every frame on that card, 247 exposures across 6 hours of shooting in different locations, different angles, different light. The figure was in every single one, not always at the same distance, not always in the same place, but always present, always perpendicular to the ground, always, as far as I could tell from thumbnail size, oriented toward the camera. 14 frames from the end was a shot I remembered taking, my truck from behind, parked at the road edge with a sweep of the drainage visible below it. I'd done it for compositional interest, the truck as a scale reference for the landscape. The figure was directly behind the truck, maybe 8 feet from the rear bumper, close enough that it would have been well inside my peripheral vision while I was shooting. I was out of that truck and on the road before I knew I'd moved. I stood in the middle of the road with my camera in my hand and looked in every direction. The meadow behind me empty, The tree line on both sides, still no movement. The road ahead curving down through the larches, nothing. The late afternoon light was absolutely flat and clear. There was nowhere for a person to be that I couldn't see them. I drove down that 9 miles without stopping once. I didn't look at the remaining shots for 2 weeks. When I finally did, most of them were what I expected. The figure in every frame, same posture, same forward-facing orientation. The last image on the card is one I did not take. It's a close-up portrait shot, my style exactly, the focal length and depth of field I always use for portrait work of the back of my own head, taken from approximately 2 feet behind me. My hair is the same as that day. I'm wearing the oversized fleece. The metadata timestamp says 3:14 a.m. I was home, asleep. I know this because I'd called my daughter at 11 that night, and I remember getting into bed after, and I remember my alarm going off at 7. I was home. I've been a photographer for 15 years. I know what it means when an image exists on a memory card. It means a sensor captured photons that came through a lens. It means something stood 2 feet behind me, in the dark, at 3 in the morning with my camera, and composed the shot carefully before pressing the shutter. I don't know what it wanted with that picture. I've thought about it more than is probably healthy. I haven't been back to that road. I keep the image in a folder I don't open. Story 5. The drive out to Rosaria's place. That's maybe 30-35 minutes from my house, depending on whether you go around the mesa or through the wash road. I've made it so many times I could probably do it with my eyes closed, and some mornings in the early years, half asleep before sunrise, I probably came close. I know every rut in that road. I know where the arroyos cross it and where the caliche surface breaks apart in the summer heat and gets soft. I know where the light sits at different times of day, how it changes the color of the rock from pink to orange to the particular brown of late afternoon. My wife had made that drive with me for years before she passed. She liked the way the mesa looked in the hour before sunset, the way the shadow line moved down it like a slow curtain being drawn. She'd stop me sometimes on the way back and say, "Let's just sit here a minute," and we would. She's been gone 4 years now. I say this so you understand what kind of man I am and what kind of weight I carry into every ordinary day. I'm not looking for things out in the desert. I'm not the kind of person who sees shapes in the shadows and assigns them meaning. I'm 67 years old and I've lived in this country my whole life, and I have a sense of what belongs there and what doesn't. That afternoon I drove out around 3. I talked to Rosaria on the phone the morning before. She's 91, still in her own house, good mind but the body wearing out, and she'd mentioned the propane gauge on her stove looked low and she wasn't sure about it. I said I'd come by and check. I also just wanted to see her. She knew my wife. There aren't many people left who did. I sat with Rosaria for about 2 hours. Drank her tea, which is very strong and tastes like the desert floor, which she takes as a compliment. We talked about her granddaughter's new baby, about the weather, about a dog someone had abandoned on the road near her house that she'd been feeding for a week. Her propane gauge was fine, just dirty glass making the level hard to read. I cleaned it. She thanked me. I left around 6. The light was doing exactly what my wife used to stop for, that slow curtain coming down the mesa face, turning it the color of old copper. I drove slowly. There was no reason to hurry. About 1.5 miles from Rosaria's gate, on the straight section where the road runs level across the flat before it starts the gentle rise toward the mesa base, I heard a voice. I thought I'd left the radio on, but my radio has been broken for 3 years. The tuner went and I haven't gotten it fixed, and the speaker buzzes on any station it still catches, which is none. The truck was silent except for the engine and the tires on the road surface. I heard my wife say, "Come sit with me a minute." Those words exactly. Her voice exactly. The The particular way she said minute with the emphasis just slightly off from how most people say it, a small thing, a nothing thing, the kind of thing you notice in 20 years of living with a person and then carry with you forever after. I stopped the truck. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, and I thought about what I had actually heard. I'm a rational man. I know that grief makes the mind do strange things. I know that familiar voices can seem to appear from ambient sound, wind, engines, road noise. I know this, but the road was quiet, and I heard her again. She said my name, my full name, the one she used when she was being serious, not the shortened one most people use. My full name in her voice from somewhere below me and ahead. I opened the door and got out. I walked to the front of the truck and stood there in the road and looked down at my feet. The road surface, bare caliche, hard-packed, the color of old bone, was moving. Not visibly, not in any way I could have described to someone else, but I could feel it through my boot soles. A subtle vibration, a pressure and release, slow as breathing. I crouched down. My knees don't like that much anymore. I put my hand flat on the road surface. The hands, they were pressed up from below. Dozens of them, I am not exaggerating. There were dozens pushing up through the road surface without breaking it, as if the road were not caliche and packed earth, but something thinner, something more yielding, like fabric over a frame. Palm shapes and finger shapes bulging up, some small, some large. All oriented the same way, pressed flat against the underside of the road, pushing upward, not breaking through. I stood up slowly. My heart was doing something I didn't entirely like. My wife spoke again. I won't tell you what she said this time. That part is mine. I stood there in the road for what felt like a long time. Maybe it wasn't long. I spoke a few words to the road, quietly, the way you speak to something you're not sure can hear you. I don't know why I did that. It seemed like the right thing to do. Then I got back in my truck and drove home at my normal speed. That night I was reading in my chair, and the radio, the broken radio, the one with the dead tuner and the buzzing speaker, turned itself on. It found a station clearly, no buzzing, just clear sound. It played one song, the song they played at my wife's funeral, which I had not heard since that day and had never looked up and had not thought about in some time. When the song ended, the radio went off again. I turned the dial. Nothing. It's been 3 years and it still doesn't work. It played one song that night and then went back to being broken. I believe the road was holding something. I believe it was holding it a long time. I don't believe it meant harm by what it did. I'm not sure. I believe it knew the difference. Story 6. Okay, so I took the mail route job for one reason. My roommate got mono in June and I suddenly owed twice the rent. I had 2 weeks before summer classes started back and I needed money fast, and the post office was hiring rural route drivers. No experience required. You just needed a valid license and a car with good enough mileage and a tolerance for early mornings. I had all 3 of those things technically. The route was County Road 9 and its tributaries, maybe 40 miles total, serving something like 24 mailboxes spread across a stretch of northern Vermont that makes you wonder how anyone decided to live there. Dense maple and beech forest on both sides of the road the entire way. Maybe 3 houses visible from the road, the rest up long gravel driveways you couldn't see from the pavement. Beautiful country. Also, if I'm being honest, slightly oppressive in the way that very dense forest can be, all that green light filtering down, no real sky to look at, the sense that the trees are the world and everything else is just paths through them. First week went fine. I got lost twice because the route sheets are written by someone who apparently learned navigation before GPS was invented and thinks turn at the property with the old silver barn is a useful landmark, but I figured it out. The regulars were mostly pleasant. A couple of them left cookies in their mailboxes, which I'm pretty sure is not technically protocol, but I ate the cookies. The first time I noticed the shape, I didn't register it as anything. There's a half-mile stretch on the southern end of the route where the road runs very straight through unbroken forest. No driveways, no houses, no breaks in the tree line. I started noticing, around my 3rd week, a shape in the trees about 30 yards off the road on the east side, just visible between the trunks at the edge of where the light gave way to the forest interior. My brain cataloged it as a deer. Deer stand in the forest at the edges all the time, watching roads. I barely registered it. Then I saw it on the north section of the route. Different location, different species of trees, but the same upright stillness at the same distance from the road. And it was big enough that deer didn't quite work as an explanation, but I tried it anyway. Big deer exist. Moose are all over Vermont. I tried to see it clearly, but every time I slowed down and looked directly at the spot where it had been, it was gone. Or the trees were just trees, and whatever I'd been seeing was a pattern of light and shadow that my brain had assembled into a shape out of habit. I've read about that pareidolia, the tendency to find faces and figures in random visual noise. I thought about that a lot over those weeks. I think it was a Wednesday, maybe a Thursday, when I was running late. The person ahead of me on the route had flagged me down to ask about a package, and it had taken 15 minutes longer than it should have. I was moving faster than usual on the southern stretch, paying more attention to my route sheet than the road, when I came around the slight curve in the otherwise straight section, and it was standing in the road. Not at the tree line, in the road. It was crossing, walking from the east tree line to the west, slowly, in no hurry at all. And I hit the brakes and stopped about 40 feet from it, and it stopped walking, and it turned and looked at me. It was approximately the size and proportion of a tall person. It was pale in the overcast morning light. It had hair, or something that functioned as hair, and it was wearing something that might have been clothing or might have been nothing. My brain refused to resolve the image. And where its face should have been, where I was waiting to see eyes, a nose, a mouth, there was nothing. Not darkness, not shadow, smooth, continuous pale skin, unbroken, a blank oval where face belongs. It turned that blank thing toward me, and I sat in my car for approximately 3 seconds looking at it, and then it continued walking across the road and went into the trees on the west side and was gone. I finished the route. I genuinely don't know how I finished the route. I think I must have gone into some kind of automatic mode, because I have almost no memory of the next hour, just stopping at boxes, opening them, inserting mail, driving to the next one. The cozy, mechanical repetition of a job I'd learned well enough to do without thinking. I got to the last 3 boxes on the route, a cluster of rural mailboxes on a post at a T-intersection. Opened the first one to put in the delivery, and found the bundle of dried grass on top of the outgoing mail. Someone had bound several stalks of dried grass around a central stalk to make a rough human shape. A head, a body, arms spread wide, placed in the mailbox carefully on top of the letters that had been there before I opened it. I opened the second box. Same thing, slightly different arrangement, different grass. Third box, one there too. I had opened those 3 boxes maybe 15 minutes earlier at the start of the route. There had been nothing but outgoing mail, no bundles of grass, no tiny figures. I had been on a 40-mile loop, and I had come back to find them waiting. I quit that afternoon. Called the post office, told them there was a family situation. They were understanding about it. I never drove County Road 9 again. I got a job at a coffee shop instead, which paid less and smelled like steamed milk, but had the significant advantage of having a lot of people in it at all times. I think about the route sometimes. I think about that blank oval turning toward me with the patience of something that wasn't in a hurry, that knew exactly where I was going and could wait. I think about it more than I'd like to. Story 7. I've written a lot of incident reports in my 8 years with the trail crew, but I've never written one about this. I've thought about it. I've sat down in front of the form more than once, but the sections don't accommodate what I'd be describing. There are boxes for injury, for equipment failure, for weather event, and there's a notes field that's clearly designed for things like chainsaw kicked back or crew member twisted ankle crossing creek. There's no box for what I need to put in it. So I'm telling you instead, and I want to be as precise as I can be, because precision is how I process things. There were 3 of us, Abena Reyes and Steph Lindqvist and me, Nadia Farrow. We're a contract trail maintenance crew. We've worked together for 4 seasons now. The assignment was the upper section of the Payette Wilderness Trail in Idaho, a 7-mile stretch of tread that hadn't been maintained in 3 years due to funding gaps and a wildfire that had made the access road questionable. We planned 3 days in, day 1 getting to mile 16 and setting up base camp, day 2 and 3 working our way back down toward the trailhead, clearing drainage structures and doing tread work. The hike in was unremarkable. Abena was complaining about his pack straps the entire way, which he does on every trip, and Steph had found a podcast about competitive cheese making that she had opinions about. And by the time we reached the mile 16 meadow and got the tents set up, it was late afternoon and none of us were feeling anything unusual. The forest in that section is primarily lodgepole pine transitioning to subalpine fir as you gain elevation. Deadfall on both sides of the trail from the previous years, some of it old enough to be moss-covered, some newer, nothing unusual. We made dinner, checked tomorrow's work sections, went to bed early. The first sounds started around 1 in the morning. I heard them from inside my tent, a movement in the forest, maybe 30 yards north of camp. Not one thing moving, multiple things, spaced unevenly, the kind of distributed rustling you might expect from a small herd of ungulates passing through. I lay still and listened. It continued for maybe 2 minutes, then stopped. Elk or deer, I figured. We were well into elk country. I went back to sleep. Abena mentioned at breakfast that he'd heard something in the night too. Steph hadn't woken up. We noted it as probable wildlife and started working. Day 2 was when things started to feel wrong in a way that was difficult to articulate. We were clearing a section of trail about a 1/4 mile south of camp, removing a tangle of deadfall that had buried the tread, and I kept having the sensation of drifting. Not physically drifting, but navigationally. I'd look up from the work and realize I'd oriented myself slightly wrong, that I was facing northeast when I thought I was facing south. I recalibrated 3 times. I'm good with cardinal directions in the field. I've been doing this for 8 years, but the forest seemed to be doing something subtle to my internal compass. I didn't mention it to the others until Abena stopped working mid-afternoon and said, "Does this section feel right to you? We should be cutting west here, but it feels like we've been going." And then he stopped. I don't know how to describe it. Steph looked at her GPS. We were approximately where we should be, but she agreed. Something about the spatial orientation felt off. Like walking in a room where the furniture has been moved slightly, everything in roughly the right place but wrong enough to feel. That night the sounds came back louder. They circled the camp. I'm aware of how that sounds, but that's what they did. I was awake for most of it, lying in my tent tracking the sound patterns as methodically as I could, and whatever was out there was coordinating. Moving to the north, pausing, resuming from the south, moving east, the whole circuit taking maybe 20 minutes and then repeating. Not random wildlife passing through, something deliberate, something that was attending to the boundaries of our camp. I got up at about 2 and did a watch shift because I wasn't sleeping anyway. I sat in my camp chair with my headlamp on low, facing the tree line to the north, which was where the sounds were currently concentrating. That's when I saw the stones. About 50 yards off the trail to the northeast, in a gap between the lodgepoles where my headlamp beam just barely reached, was a circle of stones. Large, dark, arranged with the deliberateness of something placed rather than deposited. I know the difference between a natural rock accumulation and a constructed ring, and this was constructed. Inside the circle I could make out shapes. I walked toward it, which I know was probably not the wisest choice, but I'm a field person and I wanted to see clearly. The shapes were skulls. Deer skulls mostly, and at least one larger, bear-sized, and a scattering of smaller ones I couldn't identify, arranged inside the circle facing outward in every direction, packed closely enough that their eye sockets created an unbroken outward gaze around the entire circumference. Not fresh, these were bleached, dry, long cleaned. Old, but arranged with a precision that required patient, deliberate placement. Skull after skull after skull, all facing out like sentinels or warnings, surrounding nothing. The center of the circle was just forest floor, pine needles, bare ground. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, then I went back to camp. The third day, the sounds were gone. We woke up to ordinary forest quiet, worked our section, broke camp, and hiked out. We didn't discuss what any of us had experienced, not in the way you'd expect. We talked around it, said things like rough nights and weird wildlife behavior. The stone circle I mentioned once to Abena, and he looked at me for a moment and then said, "I know," and we left it there. I didn't discover the GPS track until about a week after we got back, when I was logging the coordinates for my field notes. Our tracks for all 3 days form a spiral, starting large on day 1, tightening incrementally each day. A perfect logarithmic spiral centered on the stone circle. We had been circling it, getting closer. For 3 days, something had been guiding us in a pattern none of us intended or noticed, tightening the circuit day by day. I've been in the field a long time. I know how to navigate. I know how to hold a line. Whatever was out there was better at it than I am. Story 8. I want to be honest about the fact that I almost didn't stop. I'd been driving for 5 hours, and I was tired in that specific way that makes you think you're still sharp when you maybe aren't. The Upper Peninsula in late October is the kind of beautiful that feels slightly mournful. The trees mostly bare, the sky that low, flat gray that can last for weeks, the roads getting progressively emptier the further north you go. I was heading to a rental cabin I'd booked for a week's vacation, my first real time off in 2 years. My divorce had been finalized in August, and a friend had told me that what I needed was a week of solitude, no email, no phone if I could manage it. I am not the kind of person who typically picks up hitchhikers. I want to be clear about that. I'm a careful person. I was raised to be careful. But this was a 2-lane highway through empty forest, and the figure standing at the roadside was clearly just a person, upright and non-threatening, and there was no traffic in either direction for as far as I could see. I pulled over. A man got in, 40 perhaps, hard to gauge. Brown jacket, plain. He said he'd broken down about 2 miles back and was trying to reach the next town. He said it quietly, without any of the gratitude that usually accompanies that kind of request, more the way you'd state a fact. I said fine and pulled back onto the road. I had a coffee thermos in the cup holder that I offered. He declined. I mentioned the weather. He responded, normal conversation, and I was tired enough that I wasn't paying close attention to the content, just the fact of it. Human presence, voice, and response, which was what the road needed after 5 hours of podcast silence. Then I noticed his hands. They were resting on his knees, ordinary posture, but the fingers were too long. Not dramatically, not in any way that announced itself, but slightly. The kind of thing you register and then discount and then register again. I told myself he was just a tall man with long hands. I've known tall people with long hands. I looked at the road. I asked where he'd come from. He answered a moment after I expected him to, not a long pause, just a half beat, like the words were traveling slightly further than they should. I told myself he was tired, or English wasn't his first language, or he was just slow in that natural talker way some people are. I'd been driving for 5 hours. My judgment on conversational timing was not at its finest. He smiled at something I said, I can't remember what, and the smile was wrong. Wide in a way that suggested the underlying musculature was arranged differently than expected, pulling back further at the corners than a normal smile reaches. But he was in the corner of my vision and I was watching the road, and I told myself I was tired and overinterpreting everything, which I was. I looked in the rearview mirror to check behind me. The passenger seat in the reflection was empty. I can see it now very clearly when I recall it, the mirror image of the seat, the headrest, the window behind it showing moving trees. Unoccupied, I could feel the presence in the seat beside me. I could sense the weight distribution of the car, slightly off-center with a passenger aboard. I could hear the slight displacement of his breathing, and the seat in the mirror was empty. I looked at the seat directly. He was there. Brown jacket, hands on knees, face turned toward the window. I looked in the mirror again. Empty. He hadn't moved. He didn't react. I don't think he noticed, or he didn't care, or caring didn't apply to him in the way it would apply to a person who understood what they were showing. I pulled over at the first flat stretch of shoulder I found. Said something about thinking I had a tire issue, needed to check it. Got out, walked around the car slowly. Checked each tire with reasonable thoroughness. Came back to the driver's door, looked through the window. The passenger seat was empty, no one in it. Seat belt still buckled across nothing because I'd heard the click when he'd put it on. I got in, drove the rest of the way to the cabin, didn't stop again. The next morning, in the gray early light, I found it on the passenger seat. A flower pressed flat, dry as old paper, colorless almost, placed precisely in the center of the seat cushion. I don't know the species. I showed a photo of it to a botanist I know later, and she said she'd need to see it in person, but from the photo it looked like something from a genus that didn't grow in Michigan. Not anywhere in Michigan, not in any nearby state. Underneath the flower was a note. It was in my handwriting. I know my handwriting. I've been writing in the same hand for 30 years, the particular way I form my lowercase letters, the slight forward lean. It was my hand, and it said, "You're going the right way." I hadn't written it. I have never written it. I have it still, and I look at it sometimes, and I think about the fact that it could be a reassurance or a warning or something that doesn't fit either category. I'm a careful person. I like things that make logical sense. I have not made sense of this yet. Story 9. I need to tell you something about that road before I explain what happened on it. Because the road has a history in our family that goes back before my grandmother, and maybe before her mother, and none of it was ever written down properly. Just passed along the way families pass things, in partial sentences and changed subjects, and the particular tone adults use when they're saying that something is finished and not open for discussion. The raised road runs east for about 1.5 miles through the back of the Villanova property in the Atchafalaya. My grandmother grew up on that land, and she left it when she married, and she spent the rest of her life not going back to it specifically. She never explained why. Every time anyone brought up the back acreage, the old raised road, what was beyond it, she would say simply, "That road is not for going down," and then she'd change the subject. My grandmother was not a dramatic woman. She was not given to superstition or vague warnings. She was the most practical person I've ever known, and so when she said something like that with that particular flatness, I understood it mattered. She died when I was 13. The property passed to my aunt, who couldn't afford to maintain it, and eventually it came in parts to various cousins, including to my cousin Dario and to me, each with a parcel of the original acreage. We were 24 and 19 when we inherited. We'd driven down there together to walk the land. I want to tell you about the drive there first. We stopped at a place in Maringouin that had good boudin, and Dario ate 2 links and immediately regretted it, which I mention because it was that kind of ordinary afternoon, hot even in November the way coastal Louisiana gets, the smell of mud and sugar cane and diesel from the highway, a radio station playing Zydeco that Dario found annoying and I loved. We were not in a solemn mood. We were 2 young people driving to look at some family land we now legally owned and didn't know what to do with. The raised road is exactly what it sounds like, a narrow dirt causeway built up from the surrounding ground so that it stays passable even when the bayou floods. It's maybe 6 feet wide at the top, with steep sloped sides dropping down to the water on both sides, and the bayou runs right alongside it, separated by those slopes, close enough that you can hear the water moving if it's moving. We walked in. It was midday, fully lit, not dark at all. I say this because what happened didn't require darkness. The water beside the road was dark, the way bayou water is dark, tannin-stained and opaque, but the light above was clear and present. About a quarter mile in, Dario said, "Something's keeping pace with us." I'd noticed it about 2 minutes before that and hadn't wanted to say it. In the water on the left side of the road, just below the surface, something was moving. You could track it by the subtle wake it made, the slight displacement of the surface water, a long, slow shape just barely submerged, moving at our exact walking speed. We both stopped. It stopped too. "Gator," I said. "Gators don't track you like that," Dario said. He wasn't wrong. We watched the shape for a while. It floated just under the surface with a stillness that wasn't quite right for something alive, and then it moved again, keeping pace when we started walking. We kept going. I don't know why. I was 19 and the land was mine, and I hadn't believed my grandmother's warning the way I should have. About 3/4 of a mile in, the shape surfaced, not the whole thing, a hand. It came up to the edge of the road surface and rested there, fingers spread flat on the caliche, palm down, water draining off it and running back into the bayou in thin rivulets. A human hand or the shape of one. It rested on the road edge for 10 seconds. I counted. I know I counted because I was doing something with my mind that was the mental equivalent of gripping something very hard, and counting was the thing I gripped. On the hand's third finger was a ring, gold, simple band with a small dark stone set in it. My grandmother's ring. I know that ring. I watched my grandmother wear it every day of my life for 13 years, and I watched them put it on her hand in the casket, and I stood at the graveside when they closed it. Her ring, the specific one, the size of it, the dark stone, the particular width of the band, her ring. The hand slid back under the water without a sound. Dario and I looked at each other and then we ran. That's all I can tell you about the escape. We ran that 3/4 mile back to the road end and then another 100 yards to where the car was parked, and we got in and we drove, and we did not speak for a long time. When I got home that night, the ring was on my kitchen table. I called every member of my family. No one had been in my apartment. No one had a copy of the key. No one had thought to retrieve the ring before burial. It was a thing we talked about at the time and decided against. I had a friend who does estate jewelry take a look at it. She examined the hallmarks, the stone, the metalwork, and she confirmed it was old, consistent with the period my grandmother would have received it, real gold and a real stone, worn in the way a piece of jewelry gets worn over decades of use. It's my grandmother's ring. I keep it in a box in my closet. I wear it sometimes on nights when I feel like I need something to hold on to. I don't know what is in that bayou. I don't know what has been there since before my grandmother was born, what she knew about it that she carried alone and silent her whole life. I know she said the road was not for going down, and I know she was right, and I know she had a reason. I just wish she'd told me what it was. Story 10. My mother died in April, and by September I still hadn't dealt with the property. That's what I told myself anyway, that I hadn't dealt with it, as if the house were a paperwork problem or a scheduling conflict. What I mean is, I hadn't been able to make myself drive up Hatchet Road and go inside the house where I grew up, because my mother was dead and the house was where she'd always been, and the thought of walking through it alone made me feel like a door in my chest would open onto something I wasn't ready for. I'm 55. I know grief. This was the 3rd time I'd lost someone I couldn't imagine being without, and I knew the theory of it. The way it sharpens some days and goes dull on others, the ambushes, the strange plateaus. I wasn't fragile. I just kept finding reasons to handle the estate paperwork from a distance for 5 months, until my lawyer finally said that I needed to physically go to the property before the sale could proceed, and I ran out of delays. Hatchet Road is in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. It's a dirt road off a county route that I couldn't tell you the number of if you asked me. It's just the turn below the old Blevins place, which is how we always said it. The road goes about 2 miles through second-growth hardwood before the property opens up. A clearing, a small pond, the house, a barn that's been leaning since the 1990s. My mother had lived there alone for 20 years after my father died. She kept it up as best she could. The house would need work to sell, but it would sell. I made myself go on a Saturday in mid-September. Clear day, cool, the maples starting to turn at the edges. I drove up Hatchet Road for the first time in 30 years, and everything about it was smaller than I remembered, and the same as I remembered, the way places from childhood do that strange compression when you return to them as an adult. The red clay of the road, the particular lean of the trees over it, the way the light came through in moving patches. I parked in front of the house and sat in my car for a while. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't emotional. I was. I cried a little and then I stopped and I got out and I walked the property first because I wasn't ready to go inside. I walked down to the pond, around the barn, through the old garden space that had gone completely to weeds. An hour, maybe more, just walking, letting the place exist around me before I had to look at the interior. I was coming back toward the house from the garden side when I saw the girl in the road. She was standing at the far end of the clearing, where Hatchet Road emerged from the trees, facing me. She was small, 9 years old perhaps, or close to it. She was wearing clothes I recognized. A pale yellow shirt I'd had as a child, jeans with a frayed knee, sneakers I'd had in exactly that style. I knew the clothes because they were mine, because I had worn them at approximately that age, playing in this yard, running down this road. I stopped walking. I told myself in rapid succession, there are neighboring children who sometimes trespass on the property. The shirt was a common enough style that coincidence was possible. I was in a highly emotional state and therefore primed to see things that weren't there. Then she tilted her head and looked at me, and the angle of the tilt was wrong, not childlike curiosity, not the naturalness of a 9-year-old's movement. Something deliberate and adult in the way she positioned herself, like someone wearing the shape of a child without having been one. She was still there when I looked away and looked back. Then I went inside. I walked through the house. I found my mother's things, the boxes I'd need to sort, the furniture I'd need to arrange to have removed or donated, the small accumulated evidence of a whole life lived in one place. I spent 2 hours in there, and while I was inside, I didn't see anything unusual. It was leaving that I understood. I was walking back to my car with the first box of things I was taking home, documents, some photographs, small items, and I looked down at the mud in front of the car, where the rain from the night before had left the ground soft. My footprints were there, the adult woman's footprints in work boots, the trail of them going from the car to the house when I arrived. And behind them, behind every set of my own footprints, the entire length of every path I'd walked that day, the pond route and the barn route and the garden loop and the route back were smaller footprints. A child's sneakers with a distinct tread, size appropriate for a 9-year-old, following mine everywhere I had walked for the entire day. They appeared as if they had always been there, as if I had simply failed to see them all day long and now they could be seen. I put the box in the car. I got in. I did not look at the end of the road where I had seen the girl. I drove down Hatchet Road without stopping, and I called my lawyer from the county route and told him to proceed with the sale sight unseen. I'd sign whatever he needed. I wasn't going back. I found the photograph 3 weeks later, sorting through my mother's boxes at home. A Polaroid I'd never seen me, at approximately 9 years old, standing in the yard of the homestead on a summer afternoon. I know it's me. I know my own face at that age from other photos. I'm standing with my back mostly to the camera, looking at something off to the left. Behind me at the right edge of the frame, slightly blurred by the depth of field, is a second figure, smaller than me, facing the camera. Its mouth is open too wide, not screaming, not crying, just open in a way that suggests more room inside than there should be. A second row of teeth just barely visible in the blur. I don't know who took the photograph. I don't know who the second figure is. I don't know how long it had been following me around that yard that day in the Fode, or the day in September when I went back, or every visit before that, or all the years I was a child playing on that road and didn't have the eyes to see it yet. My mother said the road was nothing to worry about. She said it every time we drove it when I was small. Nothing to worry about up here, just us. I wonder sometimes if she knew. And if she did, what it cost her to say that and keep her voice normal and keep her eyes on the road and keep me from seeing what was behind me every single day of the first decade of my life. I wonder if she was protecting me or herself. I haven't opened the box since. Thanks for watching. If these stories got under your skin, and I suspect at least one of them did, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Drop a comment letting me know which road you'd least want to find yourself on and which story stuck with you the most. I know mine. Share this with someone who needs a reason not to take that shortcut tonight. Until next time, stay on lit roads, and if you hear your name called from somewhere it shouldn't be coming from, don't answer it.